Greetings, my name's Anson Cooley, and you're watching part 2 of our series on governance. In our last video, we discussed what governance was and how it can help your organization. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the practical applications of governance in your institution. Stay tuned. Before we get started with our video, you might be wondering, why am I dressed differently from the original video, our first video? Well, I wanted to make a quick point to you about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay? Whether or not I'm dressed like this, or dressed like this, or dressed like this, I bring the same knowledge, experience, and value to your organization. In the same way, other individuals that are looking for jobs, other individuals that would like to be on your board of directors, all can bring value if they're allowed to bring their uniqueness and their full selves to your organization. Remember that. Let's get started with our video. So in our last video, we defined governance as the act or process of governing or overseeing the control and direction of something such as an organization. And out of that definition, I asked you to focus on two words: control and direction. Also in the last video, I used an analogy where I described the credit union as a car owned by its members. And those members select a group of directors who then select the CEO to drive the car. But the important thing to make sure that we remember is that the credit union itself belongs to who? The members. And those members do what? Select directors who then do what? Employ a CEO to do what? Drive the car. Now let's move on and let's build on some of the foundations of how we can practically apply governance principles in our institution. Now there are three fundamental components to any governance framework. Some of them are quite obvious, but oftentimes they're not expressed fully in organizations. They are your mission and values, your strategic objectives, and your organization's risk appetite and risk tolerances. Typically, when we define our mission and vision goals, we use very generic and very broad language to describe what we'd like to achieve. For example, the credit union exists to provide the financial well-being of its members and to provide products and services that will benefit the members via their financial needs. But I think I should give you another example because I can already hear somebody saying, Anson, that's too operational. You shouldn't be giving management specific things that they should be doing. Boards shouldn't get involved. Let me give you another example. If in your mission statement, you say that you'd like to promote financial literacy. Well, what does that mean? The management team, for a mission-specific goal, should perhaps maybe say that you're going to develop a financial literacy app or purchase a financial literacy app. That would be a mission-specific goal number one. The second mission-specific goal would be to market that app and then get an adoption rate of maybe 30% in the first year. So now we have our mission statement to promote financial literacy among our members, right? Then we have something specific and measurable to report back to the board to ensure that we're actually achieving our mission goals. Does that make sense? So in our next building block for strong governance fundamentals, we're going to discuss strategic planning, but more specifically, setting effective and measurable strategic objectives. So one of the things that's always a sticking point between CEOs and boards is whether or not the board of directors are getting into too many operational matters. And then also whether or not the CEO is getting too far into strategic matters on the board side. So one of the things I wanted to briefly do is just kind of give you some examples of some balls and some strikes where there's either an overstep on the CEO side or an overstep on the board side. So let me be very clear. It is well within a board's purview to set high-level strategic goals for their management teams. Here are some examples. Asset growth. Perhaps you're only $200 million in assets and the board would like to grow to $500 million in assets. It is well within the board's purview to give that as a strategic goal for management. Now, that's a strategic objective. For management should then take that goal and operationalize it and outline an operational plan for that goal to happen within a specific period of time. Another area that's well within the board's purview are earnings goals. For example, the board can set a return on average assets goal for the management team, saying, hey, next year, while we're growing from here to here, we want to make sure that we have a return on average assets of maybe 60 basis points, for example. What's outside of the board's purview is how management goes about doing that. I have some boards that like to communicate, hey, we want to have the lowest fees and we want to have the highest CD rates, but you also want management to do what? Hit these earnings targets. So you're telling them how to do it from an operational standpoint. That's a ball. But you can communicate a bare minimum of earnings you'd like to see in the next year. Lastly, before I move on to the next section, I want to talk a little bit about accountability. Credit union boards often do a poor job of holding their management teams accountable for not hitting their agreed upon strategic objectives. I mean, go back and look at your strategic planning objectives for the last 3 to 4 years. How many of them have you hit? And how many of them have you missed? And have you ever asked your management team why? And oftentimes when I go into planning sessions or when I'm discussing this topic at conferences, I'll have CEOs walk up to me and say, Anson, why are you creating division within our organization? Division? You mean you're an employee of the board, you committed to doing something, you didn't achieve it, and someone's bringing it to their attention and now you're angry about it? I mean, I'll respond to that CEO and say, well, you have employees that you have expectations of. Why shouldn't the board have expectations of you? And in that same line of thinking, boards should be comfortable with bonusing out managers that exceed expectations. So if your manager or your CEO is consistently beating peer, consistently coming up with creative objectives, doing new things and exceeding your expectations, then you need to make sure that you bonus them out and pay them appropriately. Let's move on. Risk appetite, simply defined, is the level of risk that an organization is prepared to accept in pursuit of its objectives. Risk tolerance, simply defined, reflects the acceptable variation in outcomes related to specific performance measures linked to objectives your organization seeks to achieve. Now, let me give you an example of what that looks like in the context of credit unions. Your organization's mission might be to help low-income families get access to credit at a reasonable interest rate, okay? A part of that mission means that you have to originate loans to folks with lower credit scores, okay? Your board might have a higher appetite for risk and pursue that mission in originating those loans. However, when you originate those loans, you put yourself at risk for charge-offs. Those charge-offs might lead to lower earnings, and those lower earnings might lead to a negative impact on your organization's capital. So although you may have a mission statement where you want to lend in that manner, although you may have an appetite for that kind of risk, your tolerance for those earnings going down and your tolerance for your capital potentially being less than what you expected will ultimately affect your decision as to whether or not you pursue that strategic objective. In closing, ensuring that your institution has a strong governance process in place is one of the most important responsibilities you have as a director. If you don't have a governance process in place currently, it would be one of the most important things you leave behind during your tenure as a board member. If you'd like to learn more about governance, inquire about our governance audits, our enterprise risk management consulting, or our board governance training packages, please email me at acooley@syncuc. Thank you for your time, and see you soon.